you have to have customers and you have to prove that those customers are getting real value and that it's something that's repeatable and leverageable, and that if you were to sort of triple or double the size of your company, then you should be able to triple or double or ideally 10x the value of that company.
This is Funded, a show where founders who raised millions in venture capital share the gritty side of what it actually took to get that money in the bank. I'm Jason Ye. Not too long ago, I was trying to get my ideas funded. And back in the day, I was a VC listening to founders pitch me for money. What separates a winning startup from the hundreds of others competing to get funded isn't just a brilliant idea. It's also timing, building strong relationships, and the ability to plan ahead. And for today's guest, he's been doing exactly that his entire life. From growing up in rural Kentucky with big dreams, to earning a PhD from MIT, working with giants like Google, Facebook, and Amazon, and finally launching a startup of his own. He's been laying the groundwork for success every step of the way. Today I'm speaking with Curtis Northcutt, founder and CEO of Cleanlab, one of the fastest growing AI startups in the market. Curtis recently closed a massive $25 million Series A, co-led by Menlo Ventures and TQ Ventures. And today we're taking a closer look to hear about the preparation, strategy, and conversations that made it happen. But before we get into the fundraising playbook, I wanted to rewind the clock a bit to the early days when Curtis was just a kid in rural Kentucky with big ambitions, figuring out how to turn frustration into fuel for something bigger.
Yeah, cool question. So I'm from Kentucky, and I have not met a lot of people who did their PhDs at MIT, who are running companies in the Bay Area, who have Fortune 500 customer companies, who are from Kentucky. And if they are, they're not from rural Kentucky. And so I to be honest, I was pretty lonely as a kid, and that's kind of true today. I have great friends. I've met great people in my life, but there's some loneliness to that journey. And I think a lot of young entrepreneurs it's good to know that you're not alone in the loneliness of but that is definitely, so how I felt, I felt pretty frustrated as a kid, to be honest. Like there's the happy story we tell, and then the reality is I was a pretty frustrated kid.
Well, it's interesting that you say not only from Kentucky, but hinted at being from rural Kentucky. I don't hear even a slight bit of affectation from rural Kentucky. So there's a bit of an evolution that happened. I wonder, you ended up in a PhD program at MIT and raising millions of dollars, and now you're in San Francisco. Were there role models even around you, in rural Kentucky that sort of drove you in this direction? Can you talk about what your parents did growing up or anything like that?
Yeah. Maybe two things. One is I should finish on the first thing, which is I felt like I said I was frustrated. I didn't say why. I should say I was frustrated because there's a tremendous lack of opportunity in rural Kentucky if you want to do great things that change the world. And you just don't have access to a lot of resources. So the people who, and my dad was a mailman. My mom works in a call center still today. And they didn't get along very well either. So very much a home that wasn't too happy, to be honest. And it was tough, and we were hungry, and we didn't have a lot of food, and it was the real deal, like stone shack with like hole in the ceiling in rural Kentucky, not a farm, not like horses, none of that, like random chickens from the farm next door flying into our yard kind of thing.
Wow.
So it's very frustrating when you're somebody, and who I was somebody who I would go to school and I would learn mathematics from a teacher who just needed to get a paycheck and had a tough life, and she would do her best or whatever, but I knew it could be taught better. And I would spend my own time at home learning how it actually worked. But there's nothing I could do about it. Like, how frustrating was that for me? And then I would just watch the next year, all the students learn the same bad book that I had to read from the same materials that everyone else. And I was like, we're all stuck. Like, I'm surrounded by a bunch of people who are stuck, who can't change their life because these are the resources they're getting. So I want to write a textbook. And so I had this idea in my mind, I'm going to write a textbook and I'm going to change the world, And then I realized, wait a minute, I am a poor kid in rural Kentucky with no resources, the son of a mailman. I don't know anyone, and there's no way that I can write a textbook with the resources I have. So the people who I was very attracted to and who I saw as role models at that time in my life were people who transcended where they were from, but also who just were very curious and sought discovery
Hmm.
and where that led them. And it didn't have anything to do with where they're from. It had to do with their mind and what they could do with their mind.
Do you
So my role
remember any of
models were,
those? Yeah. Do you remember who those were, like, at the time?
yeah, Einstein was a huge role model for me, a huge one. I loved really ambitious people like Michael Jordan. I think a lot of kids, young boys like Michael Jordan, but I liked his ambition. That's what I liked about him. I liked that he decided I'm going to be the best no matter what holds me back. Um, I liked people like Eminem. I know that's not the typical answer you get from a founder. It's like Bill Gates or Bezos, whatever. But I like the idea of coming from a broken home, having a tough family, a tough home, but having dreams that you're going to change the world through
Yeah.
something, in his case, through music. And that he was so hungry and worked so hard that he pulled it off. And I love stories like that.
So, uh, really unique origin story, and we've had some amazing founders who do have, various backgrounds, various interest sets. There is this chip on your shoulder. There's a bit of like an energy behind you where it
Mhm.
seemed like from an early age you wanted to do something, and um, your reference to math class and thinking that you should learn it better, and then the fact that you did study computer science seems to me like you had a certain idea in your head. But when you were, say, going through high school, you probably were close to top of your class. It sounds like because of where you were able to go. Do you know what vector you were pointed in? Like, was that I want to be a scientist? Was that I want to be um, an academic, or did you have entrepreneurial dreams even in the early days back in Kentucky?
I never wanted to start a business in school. In fact, even today, if I knew anyone in the world, and I mean this isn't like something you just say to be cool. If I knew anyone in the world who could be the CEO of Cleanlab better than I could, then I would hire them. But I invented the field behind it, right? I did my PhD in it. I spent 10 years studying and building all the framework that we use. I just don't, nobody else did that. And so I've just spent too long like getting good at this one thing. And so I have to do it. But if I knew someone else who could do it, I would hire them to do it. That's what you should do because I care about the dream and I care about the vision of what we're trying to do in the world much more than I do about the position I have to do to get it done. I'll do whatever it takes to get it done if I believe it's a good thing,
Yeah.
but I just have to constantly check myself to make sure I'm doing a good thing.
Well, that
Um,
that is a great segue into maybe us spending 30 seconds on what the dream is. What is the thing that you spent you know 10 years, a decade working on and are now building towards? And by the way, this is something that I'm sure you'll have many opportunities to describe in interviews, podcasts, etc. We're only going to spend a second on this and then transition over to a different part of your journey.
cool. Yeah. The biggest problem I saw over and over, I worked at Microsoft, Google, Amazon. I spent 2.5 years at Oculus. I worked at Facebook AI Research back when it was small, and Jan LeCun ran it with like 10 people in New York. Um, they all had the same problem. They were all trying to use data to do stuff like train AI models, change the world, make the world a better place. And the data being fed in was bad. And I was like, okay, we're spending tons and tons of money and time in order to get these things to work properly. But a lot of the work we're doing is like manual sifting through data and writing Jupyter notebooks and writing a bunch of Python code to check each data. This is something every enterprise faces. I've now seen it at every major enterprise that's like in your FANG, top five. And I think we can automate it. And so I spent 10 years or so building out a set of theory and algorithms called confident learning. That was my PhD. And I did that with Isaac Chuang, who invented the quantum computer. And I took a bunch of the ideas from quantum computing and information theory. I love math and physics and science. And so it was fun for me to do that. But at the same time, it was really cool because it turned out that some of the key ideas that you use to understand the ambiguity and the uncertainty in a quantum computer in order to estimate what is actually doing so that you can do like real world analytics and computation on a quantum computer. those algorithms were generalizable to AI. And so that was my PhD, and we built this whole field. And all we end up really doing actually is one thing. We just do it really well, but it's actually like one thing that's kind of simple. We add trust and reliability to every single data point that
Mm.
goes into data driven models and out of data driven models. So product catalogs, data warehouses, AI models, LLMs. We check every output, tell you hallucination or not, trustworthy or not, and we check every input. This product catalog has an error. This Amazon thing is not it's a banana, but it's actually a hammock. This insurance thing is labeled fraud, but it's not. And we just are the people behind the scenes that are saying you can actually trust this now and you can make real revenue off of it without having to deal with a huge, massive 1,000 data science team checking everything.
Amazing. Okay. So the lead into that for Cleanlab was a long history and sort of set of experiences. And this is where I want to transition to asking you a little bit about starting Cleanlab and the idea of, would this be a venture-backed company? Venture-backed companies need money. I assume with the vision and the type of talent that you would need working on this problem, that you knew when you got out, when you started this, that you would raise money immediately. But I'll let you correct me or tell me how you thought about the starting the company. And in particular, when you decided that this was going to be a formal company that you sort of mobilized against this
hmm
problem. Was it, well, I'm just going to capitalize it around me and then get back to work by myself? Or was it immediately, here's the big vision, we can't do this on our own? Which of those two did it sound like in
It
your
was more the second one
head?
because think about it. Like I've worked at all these places. I've been at Google. I've been at Facebook. I've seen the problem in big tech. And then the reason I built this in the first place was not just because I thought it was cool. I did think it was cool. I love the idea of just AI doing everything that's hard. When humans want to solve a problem, they can push a button and
Yeah.
something helps them solve it. Like I love that idea. That's
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah.
But I
What
also is very personal for me.
right, right. And when we look about capitalizing it, I'll tell you this. I just pulled up the information that is publicly available on Crunchbase, but likely not super accurate in terms of when these fundraisers happen. What it says online is that you raised a $5 million seed from Bain Ventures in July of 2023, and then Series A from Menlo in October the same year. There's usually some sort of delay, which means I would guess that seed round were done maybe more like at the end of 2022. Could you clarify that if you're comfortable? And then I have a follow-up question around that.
Yeah. And this is just general advice. Like if you're a founder and you're going to raise a round, when you announce the round is up to you. Like it's an announcement. You don't, the world doesn't force you to announce things. Like
Yep.
if I want to tell the world my middle name is George, which it
Sure.
is, I don't have to announce that right now because the world wants me to. I can do it next year. And so it's up to you. What we did is we raised our round at the end of 2021
Mhm.
and we waited until we were getting close to Series A before we announced. And anyone can do that. It's a very reasonable thing to do. And the reason you might do that is because if you're building a very tech complicated product, like if you're building a wrapper around ChatGPT or a wrapper around, some stable diffusion, which a lot of companies are, like people laugh about it, but you can make a lot of good money and solve cool problems. Fine. You can announce right away because it's your engineering time is like half a year. If you're decently fast, you can even do 3 months.
Yeah.
But if you're building hard tech, if you're inventing something, you're building the world's first no code data curation platform. That's hard.
Yeah.
It's the first time you're defining a market. You need some time. Give yourself some time. So we took a year and a half to just build, and then we started working with customers privately. We started working with users privately. We opened it up in a very pre-launch beta. We didn't make a big announcement though. We shared with some of the places that we had worked. We shared through our open source. We have a very big open source user base. Our open source solves like a very tiny problem and doesn't work as well, but it's free, so people like to use it, and we're
Yeah.
very good to them. We treat our sort of base very well. And so we got a lot of natural, organic inbound that continues to actually grow, and we still invest in our open source community. So we get most of our inbound is natural.
Yeah.
And from that, you just listen. And when you think the product is actually good enough for enterprises, that's a good time to announce the round. And that's what we did. And then we raised our A like 3 months after that and announced that one immediately to keep the momentum going.
Yeah, so I'll pause right there because you yada 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 over maybe the part that I jump into. You have two fundraisers that we could possibly jump into, but I don't have. You're a busy guy. Right as we jumped in, you had a team of executives, and I won't say the company name, but you had a team of executives listening to you before being gracious enough to join me. So I would love to go through all your fundraisers, but knowing we don't have a lot of time, I'm going to spend more time on the second one because of the timing that you just described to me. So you raised your initial tranche of capital in maybe the hottest market ever to raise capital.
Mhm. Mhm.
Um, and you're no slouch yourself. I mean, you have humble beginnings, but certainly you have every logo under the sun and all the credibility in the world to start a company. And certainly the network, I would imagine the network to make a couple calls and start the momentum in the hottest time to raise capital. When you went out to raise the next round, not as good of a market, right? And
Mhm.
you had a lot of smart strategic communications under your belt, like what you just said. You didn't have to announce your initial round. You knew that you could use it as a marketing tool and then sort of build momentum around the next thing. So maybe we maybe we fast forward to 2023. If you'll remember in Q1 of 23, the largest bank for technology and startups totally crumbled. So we're not in the best market for venture capital at the time. Do you remember what's going through your head in terms of where the company is, what you're
Easy.
driving towards, and if where fundraising was in that sort of stack rank of priorities for you?
Yeah, I mean, it's my job to be ahead of the curve. So I was already planning for this like 6 months before Silicon Valley Bank went under,
Yeah.
and shortly after that, First Republic Bank went down. Um, I think sort of the pieces were acquired by J.P. Morgan Chase, but if you were a shareholder, you lost everything.
Yeah.
Um, so 6 months prior to that, before that happened, I chatted with people I trust and people I trust who are very close to the markets. And it's not, I'm from rural Kentucky. I'm not born with these people I trust. What you do though is you treat people well, like treat your people well. I really care about people. Like you have to care about humanity in the world, but you also have to care about the people you work with. And you always hear investors say like it's our relationship. You'll hear all these things, and founders sometimes laugh it off, and I think they're misplaced. I don't think they should laugh it off. I think they should listen when investors are saying it's about friendship because your investors are investors. They know the market.
Yeah.
Like if they don't work with a better investor, but they know the markets. You should be able to leverage your relationships to get a little bit of foresight if the market is going to go badly.
Yeah.
And so I did. And I have good investors, good people who I work with, I've talked to, and I try to maintain really good relationships with them. And they gave me a heads up. And they said, "Look, we think the market's gonna go badly." And obviously they could never predict like a bank is gonna go under,
Yeah.
but they're just talking and talking to a lot of people. And I don't have time to talk to as many people as they do in that area, but I can talk to them.
Yeah.
And so once they gave us a heads up, we had a plan originally when we started the company that we were just gonna grow the open source. And sort of 3, 4 months into the start of the company, I chatted with my co-founders, very, very smart people. I trust them very much. And we all did our PhDs together. So they're old friends. And we all sat together and we said, look, we could just build an open source company like Hugging Face and all these other companies that have done very well that way. Or we could split our bet and actually start the SaaS product now. And so we put 50% of our resources into hardening the open source and providing a very tremendously valuable product, we believe, that became the number one most used data centric AI open source platform. And that was great. But simultaneously, what we were actually spending a lot of our money on was building the SaaS product.
Hmm.
When the market went down, we were already ready. So we already had a SaaS product that we could deliver. And so what we did was we knew that investing in just open source at that time was no longer going to be a viable route forward. you have to have customers and you have to prove that those customers are getting real value and that it's something that's repeatable and leverageable. And that if you were to sort of triple or double the size of your company, then you should be able to triple or double or ideally 10x the
Yep.
value of that company. And if you're not thinking that way 6 months before these things, it's going to be a tough way to react. So we actually didn't have to react. We had already built the product. And what we had been spending 2022 on was customer acquisition, getting some good ones. So when we went into the Series A, we had already closed and we were working with FANG companies, top major enterprise companies that were already using Cleanlab and paying us for it over $500,000 deals, big enterprise deals. So when we went into the Series A round, it wasn't, it was a very different situation than a lot of other companies at that time
Yeah.
because we had strong proof points with some of the bigger companies in the world that were using our stuff and getting value from it. But we were, you hear the outcome and you're like, oh, okay. But we planned for this. Like we were planning for it every step of the way and watching the market and putting more investment in the SaaS product and in closing customer deals. As the market went down, we increased the amount of effort we put into focusing on that while still maintaining a couple engineers to maintain the open source community and support them.
Super impressive. And before we move on, I'll just say I'm Curtis. I'm like really glad that you pointed out the relationship that you have with your investors. I think it is too easy for founders to get swept up in the narrative of an adversarial relationship between founders and VCs and how we're, two opposing
Totally.
forces. And a guy like me who was a venture capitalist and then became a founder, I often talk about this idea of like jumping over to the other side. But if we're just really talking about what's right and the sort of human relationship element of this whole thing, it's important to hear that voice from a founder who's doing well, who has a company behind it, that you value your VCs, you value your investors as advisors, right? Not just sources of capital, but additional sources of value. And I think the best companies do get built alongside really strong partnerships, right? Strong partnerships with your actual team, your internal team, your co-founders, but your investors, if you're not treating them as partners and like really teammates, then you are kind of missing out on a ton of value. So I'm glad you sent that message out.
Can I add? I add
Yeah,
2 points
please.
to that. I think it'll really amplify. One is don't like if you're running a company, you're probably pretty good at something that makes you the right person to do that. But don't think about that and become blind. Like if you're like, oh, I know what I'm doing or I'm the best one to do this, that's why I do it. That is a very ignorant and blinding thought. Like it might be true, but what the ignorance is that you end up thinking that you're right all the time. That's just not going to lead to a good outcome. You're going to stop learning. So I bring that up because when you hear founders talk about investors, it's like, oh, I did a round with them. I could sell out my company for 100 million and we still don't get anything, and they get everything. Well, that's their job.
Yeah.
Like
Right.
you
Right.
need to be respectful. Like you're doing your job and they're doing theirs. You signed up for this. Like that's what you're doing. You knew that going in, and then you do the deal and then you complain or you hear the stories of like, I got nothing. The investors robbed me. You did that deal and these people were working with you and they obviously wanted to make more. Like they have ownership. They didn't want to just break even. They would have loved for you to have been more successful.
Yeah.
So that's one. A second thing is you have to recognize that you have to let go of that ego and you have to recognize they know things. They're chatting with hundreds to thousands of founders. How many founders are you chatting with?
Right. Right.
Like maybe you go to a party, maybe you have a couple founders who end up being customers, but most of your target audience is going to be established executives in the B2B, or it's going to be users. It's not going to be, you're not surrounded by founders all day with book to book calendars, getting to understand them.
Yep.
So if you think that you know the founder life, like generally across all founders better than they do, then just like consider that might not be true. And in that sense, they are actually an advisor. And the third point of feedback and the most succinct I would give is advisors should be asked for advice.
Right.
You don't have to like do what they say, but if you don't ask advisors for advice, then why are they your advisors? Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
and they're called partners for a reason because they partner with founders. Yeah, like there's reasons behind all this stuff that I just think they get caught up in the numbers and they miss. And the relationships are really important to success.
Yeah. I think the last thing I'll leave on this point before moving on, which is so important, and it's something that I stress so much with founders because most skip over this step, is in order to fundraise well and in order to interact with investors well, whether it is on the fundraising trail or working as partners once they're on your cap table, you probably should better understand what their business is. Because the things that you just described, I don't think the vast majority of founders really understand, or they didn't care to sort of double click into it, because this idea of VCs being pirates and just coming in and taking your company and taking all the money off the table when you get none, that's not their MO. And these people are trying to make money as well. And they take on a ton of risk. They have bosses themselves, right? Their money is generally not theirs. And so we won't go in this conversation into illuminate everyone around this, but those are the dynamics that are really important so that you have a little bit more of understanding and empathy towards the people that you work with. So, Curtis, I want to very specifically ask you about the Series A led by Menlo. Were the partners at Menlo people that you had met maybe in 2023? Are they people that you had met in prior years? Like, when did that relationship building process start for you? Some of you might have wanted to roll your eyes or even skip over our discussion around understanding investors, but I hope you didn't. And I hope that you heard what Curtis was saying, because if there's one thing that I see holding founders back from raising, it's their lack of understanding in what a venture capitalist actually does and what their job actually is. When we come back, we're talking about Cleanlab's $25 million Series A round, which you definitely don't want to miss. See you after the break. There are a ton of easy to make mistakes when growing a startup. I feel like I've either made them all myself or seen them all as an advisor and investor. One super common one is waiting too long to bring in expert help around managing company finances. I get why that happens though. You're not a tiny company anymore, but you feel like you're not big enough to have an in-house finance team and don't want to waste money. My advice to you is to avoid the mistake of just winging it. This is not a time to fake it till you make it. At least talk to someone early so that you can hear about how the additional help could actually save you money and improve your operations. If you're looking for recommendations on who to talk to, check out Propeller Industries. They've worked with hundreds of venture to growth stage startups, so have a ton of deep knowledge to help you avoid major bumps and set your company up for success, whether it's talking to investors or planning for future growth. Set up a free call by going to fundedpod.com/propeller. That's PROPELLER, and tell them we sent you. They're giving Funded listeners a one-time $2,500 new client credit if you work with them for 3 months.
That's funny. So we actually were co-led, but the other firm that we co-led with is not as well known. Menlo is super well known.
Sure.
They led the round for Anthropic and like all the big companies. So a lot of people know Menlo, and they've had a very good last few years. Like if you look back 30 years ago, they're the top, VC in Silicon Valley. And then they got older and the young ones came in and the Andreessen Horowitz came in and all these big, and everyone was, and the Lightspeed and all the big, and Menlo kind of went off the radar a little bit. And then they came back and they actually ended up doing very well recently. And that's part of the reason I wanted to work with them. I love the underdog who used to be the top dog who then comes back.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful story.
Can you mention the partner that you work with over at Menlo?
I work with Matt Murphy, and there's nobody else there I would rather work with as much. It's a great team. I love all of them, but that guy is stalwart, and it's an honor to work with him. Truly, if you get to meet Matt Murphy, he's a good guy.
Love that. You were about to mention the second less well-known firm.
Yeah, so the less well-known firm is TQ. They don't do any marketing. They don't have apparel. You won't see a hat. Maybe they'll change this one day, but as far as I know,
based
no
on
hats.
this interview, maybe.
Yeah. But what makes them special is they're different. So Menlo is the big West Coast firm. They have the classical customer intros. That's like going to be tech companies, West Coast companies, in-person meetings. They've got a hiring firm that like helps you find talent. It doesn't always work out. Sometimes you gotta, find other ways, but sometimes they'll help you. They do their best. They really do try.
Yeah.
And I'd say that the value add is very high. Um, the other firm, the add is equally high, but it's very different. They're about relationship building, and they are more of a strong, warm intro with one person. They are East Coast. They're based in New York. It's led by Schuster Tanger and Andrew Marks, and they have a lot of connections through a lot of financial firms and business firms that I thought were particularly relevant to fixing and improving data, where the revenue models of those companies were directly related to trust on the data. And it's just the right type of people. But the number one reason I ended up working with them was not those things. It was because there's a nice balance of the East Coast, West Coast, and also the big firm and the small, like friendly investor firm.
Yeah.
And if you're a founder and you're setting up your team, you, if you have all bulldogs and all type A in every single seat, and nobody's like kind of a friend, you could just give a call who has like very reasonable mind and who like helps you be a better leader and is like helps you with the EQ side. It's tough, and they serve that purpose. They're good people. They're kind, um, and they're friends. I would say, which is
Yep.
I didn't expect to say that on a podcast, but I feel comfortable saying that.
That's great. Well, take us back a little bit. When did you meet Matt Murphy during that
Yeah,
venture?
right.
And
So
go ahead.
no, thank you. Yeah, so I actually met both of them in 2023, which is funny because I built the relationships like you're supposed to with other firms over the course of years.
Hmm.
But the way it worked out is a f- I just did a couple pitches, and then we just had closed a couple really good customers, and they were real use cases that have repeatability to them, and at least at minimum prove significant viability that our stuff does work and people do want to pay for it, and it's industry relevant and it's solving a major problem, which is, can you trust data? Um, and once people knew that and they've heard what's on the market and they knew that, I think it was just, I mean, I don't know how else to put this, but I think we're solving a really important problem, potentially the biggest problem for AI. And I sound like such a founder saying that, but like, what is any learning without the data you learn from? And if you can't trust the inputs going in, then how could you possibly trust the outputs going out?
Right.
So trust on data is trust on AI. And so it was very fast. So the people who knew what we did and they understood what we did, I met with them, and if it was very clear that they had been watching us and putting a lot of effort into really understanding us from day one, their day one being in 2023, and they already knew this much about us, and I hadn't even gotten to meet them yet.
Yeah.
I knew how much they cared, how much they wanted to support us, how much they understood our problem, and both of them did. And so it moved extremely quickly, and we ended up closing the round in a couple weeks versus your typical like multi-month cycle.
Yeah. And,
Um,
and so when you went out to meet them in 23, was it part of an official sort of formal launch of your fundraise? Were you like, did you talk to your co-founders, your existing investors, and say, I think we need to start talking to investors? And obviously you had a list of the firms that you had been building relationships along the way, and then these couple additional ones. Like, walk us through some of those details.
Yeah, step by step. So first thing I did is talk to my seed investors who are very good. It's Bain Capital Ventures. My lead there is RF Hillary, and very much respect him. Very
Mhm.
smart guy. He did prior to being an investor, he raised two companies as founder from scratch, and I know at least one of them sold for over 100 million. He's the real deal. Like he's a lot of people have done it like, oh, I did a seed round for a company one time, but he like sold big companies like
Yeah.
for hundreds of millions. He's the real deal. And then he was a Sequoia investor partner for a long time, maybe 7 years or so. And then very quickly became pretty high up at Bain Capital Ventures. And he's a good guy. And it took some time for me to realize just uh, how valuable of a resource he is. And I needed to learn that, honestly.
Yeah.
Because I just like you mentioned, like I'm from MIT, the hacker vibe, the hacker mindset. what are these fancy business people doing? That was kind of what I thought 5 years ago. And so when I first met him, I was like, cool, thanks for the money. Like, we're going to build
Right.
great things, you know? And, and, and we didn't interact as much in the beginning. And then over time, as he started to realize we're serious and we're here to go big, like we don't want anything less than $1 billion company, but I'd like to go even bigger than that. And I started to realize he's serious. Like he wants to help us. He's the real deal and he knows what he's talking about. That actually built into a beautiful partnership and friendship. So I asked Arif, and so here's the step by step. I Once I wanted to do the raise, I reached out to him directly. I said, "Let's chat." He had a lot of help. He helped me. Like he was like, "I think you should talk about this. I think this is going well in the market." He was supportive. He advised. He coached. I asked questions. I listened. I changed my pitch based on what he told me.
Hmm.
I took him very seriously. I made a pitch deck from scratch. I paid nobody. I paid no marketing firm. We didn't get fancy images. It was just real content, real numbers, real stuff. I made it in Google Slides myself. I didn't have like an EA make it. I just put it together, stayed up late, worked hard on it, presented it to a couple firms that were sort of friends of friends type things
Yep.
where I didn't know them before, but somebody else like was like they're a good firm. Got some feedback, heard what they thought, presented to a few firms that I thought might end up being a little bit smaller than the round we wanted to raise ultimately, but they could give me feedback on pricing. I then asked a couple firms like, "Do you think I've got the price right? Do you think I'm raising enough to get done what we're going to do?" And I kept getting feedback. It's too low. It's too low. What you guys are trying to get done, this big of a solution, enterprises, you got to raise more. You got to raise more. And I was like, it's a down market. I don't know. And they're like, I would like to invest more. And
Mhm.
so then we ended up meeting with Menlo and TQ, and they were tremendously fast. So as soon as we had the first meeting, they came back with second meeting the next day, diligence the next day, and they turned it around in a week. And so I was meeting with other people I really liked, like good people at Lightspeed, at Andreessen, at Bessemer. Really, I mean, genuinely good people there. But the speed of the firms that I ended up raising with was like 3x.
Wow.
And it showed me that their ferocity of interest was, it defined the relationship from the start because I knew we weren't going to just be another company. We were going to be Cleanlab to them. And that was
Yep.
tremendously important to them. And I loved that, and I wanted to be surrounded by people who believed in us at that level, and I think we did that, and I'm proud of the team we built.
Awesome. Curtis, I'm going to give you a different perspective on what you just described and try to
Good.
generalize this for other people because I'll tell you, it can be hard for a founder who is not in the seat yet, who doesn't have the company that you had or the product you had to hear what you had to just share right there and apply it to themselves. And I'll try to pull out the things that I think people should take away from this. So there is so first of all, you were preparing in advance, right? You talked to the expert on your team, which is Arif and Bain Ventures, to really give you an insight that you didn't have. Like you're extremely smart guy, but you also don't know you don't know the markets and you have someone
Mhm.
on your team that does. I think that's super important for everyone to take into account, which is I always tell people founders are way too close to their business to have a great perspective on how to package what they're doing to the outside world because you understand things that other people don't understand and you think things are extremely important, small details that maybe aren't as important to the market. And it's nice to
Totally.
have those experts to help you with it. So first thing, and you're preparing for it, right? Like you're getting ready to do something important and you're not just kind of pushing it to the side. You're actually putting real effort into it. And then the second thing that is important is you started having these conversations with firms, it seems like to do an information gathering session or just to get smarter about what you thought you were about to more overtly do. And what you might not, maybe you did it by design, maybe not, but there is something that exudes confidence in a founder that's like, well, we know we have something awesome. I'm just going to talk to you because I want your feedback, right? Like I actually want to know about pricing. And by the way, are we raising enough money? Um, a lot of times founders will get this advice, right? To go talk to investors first, not fully raising. I'm not technically raising, I'm just learning. Um, But it is when you do it right, you're doing it in a very um, honest and credible way, like you were doing it, right?
100%.
You actually were like, we know we're awesome. We know what we're doing is going to change the world, and I need to get some information before I do this. And so when you talk to Menlo Ventures in that sort of approach, they read what was going on. They saw you. They saw the confidence. They were like, we don't care if he's
And
technically not raising. We're gonna do this. Like we got to get this deal before it goes out to market. So, anyways, I
I
think that's an amazing story to hear, and I just want to make sure there's that translation layer.
I feel free to continue. I just wanted to interject. Don't ask a question. This is just advice I believe in. Don't ask a question you don't care about the answer to.
Right.
Like
Very
if
good.
somebody gives you advice to go ask questions before you raise, make sure you really genuinely care about the answer to those questions. Otherwise, you're not having a conversation, you're toying with people.
Yeah. You're
That's
just
just no way to
pretending.
do business.
Yeah, it's bad.
Yeah.
But
Don't toy with people. Like you need to really care about the answer. So that's one. The second one is I'm sure everyone's heard like ask for money, get advice.
mhm.
Ask for advice, get money.
Yeah. Yeah.
But there's some reason to that. It's because you're in a position to ask for advice.
Yeah.
It's not just like you do that arbitrarily. It's that you actually have something here and you're trying to figure out how to make it even bigger.
Yeah.
And that's a good place to be.
Yeah.
The last thing is, I think, just a general communication thing that I have to remind myself of because I tend to be verbose and time is the most limiting thing I have in my life. So I need to work on this. And that thing is the following. When you're going to say something, especially talking to investors, there's 3 steps in every single thing you say, everything you write. And it's pretty simple. 1 is think about what you're going to say. 2 is say it. And 3 is stop. And I think it's really easy for people to forget to think about it. They just sort of jump in. 2, they don't say it. They say something else. And then 3 is after they've said it, they keep talking. Just stop and let the person respond.
Curtis, you know, we've talked a little bit about this story of raising a couple rounds, amazing backers, and you you are solving a real problem at a big scale. And so much of this sounds easy. Every conversation I've had with founders who have a story like this, like there's always something that still hurt, right? Like fundraising is not fun usually for anyone. Is there anything around your story that you remember of like rejection or hard nights or long more difficult work sessions related to this process of talking to investors and raising capital?
I mean, there's hard things like there's the classic stories that everybody experiences where you pitch to a firm and they don't tell you they're invested in a competitor and you give them everything and you share your slide deck. And I don't think they mean to be like that. I don't think they're trying to, but it just does, it feels bad afterward when you find out you've just shared everything with them and it's like, do you not even know
Yeah.
who you're invested in?
Yeah.
And then you find out they're like, we're not going to move forward because, and you're just like, I really wish I hadn't just shared every bit of our financials and business plan with the people who are on the board of a competitor or something,
Yeah.
like, and that doesn't feel good. But I think most professional people really try to avoid that, but sometimes hairs get crossed and they don't realize who's in what meeting and mistakes get made. Um, I think another thing that was really hard was uh, it's difficult to get everybody you want in a round and not
Yeah.
dilute too much.
Yeah.
Um, so like we raised 25 million at 100 million valuation in the A round. That's 25% dilution. Mo, that's okay, but you don't want to go over that.
Yeah.
And a lot of founders wouldn't go that high. A lot of founders would say, let's keep it to 20% max.
Yeah.
15 would be ideal. The only reason I made, and that was a hard decision. Like, I just want to be clear. It wasn't easy to make that decision. The reason I did it is because I believed in the team so strongly that we were building. And I believed that we put together a very balanced and coordinated board
Yeah.
that will allow us to attack this one problem globally very effectively. If I did not have strong conviction behind that statement, I would never have taken such an equity cut. Those are the two sort of hardest things.
Well, I actually like this. I mean, let's go into this one thing and double click on it. This has just been a fascinating conversation, and I love how transparent you're being. Um, we're gonna, I asked you about like tough things, and this will sound like a rich person problem, but this is something that we haven't discussed on Funded yet, and you only lightly referenced it just now, which is you were going and raising around. It sounded like you probably were more in line with doing like a $20 million round, but there are people around the table who like want to invest in your company, and there's a tough conversation here. It's almost like at your wedding, you can't invite every person you ever met, and so some people might be hurt by the fact that they didn't get invited to the party. Can you lightly talk about the idea of like that that challenging decision to make, and
Yeah.
why was it challenging? What were the feelings that went behind it?
Yeah, no problem. And this can be done. If I was a listener, I'd be like, oh no, like is he about to embarrass himself or
Right.
like do something very. And the reason most founders don't want to talk about this is because it's sensitive, right? Dilution will always be sensitive. People have ownership. A company's doing well. They want to make as much money as possible. So dilution and talking about numbers is sensitive. But this is public information. Like people can just see there's a Forbes article out. It says we raised 25 million at 100 million.
Yeah.
Anyone can do the math. That's a 25% diluted round.
Yeah.
And so there's nothing to hide here. And that's why I'm comfortable talking about it. The way it worked was I had a 20 million at 100 million term sheet and I had that on the table. And I had two people who were moving very fast who balanced each other and brought in very different strengths that I believe together would be better than any one of them alone in terms of what they would do, the types of customer intros, the amount of reach we would get, and what we could do long term. I believe that. I still believe that after working with them, I believe it more. And at the time, what I was trying to decide is one simple thing: what's best for Cleanlab? It's really not that complicated. If you're a founder, you have a fiduciary duty to make your company successful. It's so just do your job. And my job was to raise the round that would be best for the success of Cleanlab to the best of my ability, knowing that I am imperfect and there's lots of stuff I don't know, but educate myself, get advice, and run the round professionally
Yeah.
and actually run like a process behind the round, make sure that you know what you're doing. And so in that regard, I just thought, look, I can dilute 20%, which gives more ownership of the people who are the engineers and the founders who are most invested. And that's good. But we have less access to the resources that we would get with that co-led round.
Yep.
And so I went for that. The thing to note though is when you do a co-led round, now the two leads have less ownership because they have to split it. So the only way to pull that off is to dilute a little bit more.
Yeah.
And the tricky part was how do you find that balance of giving them both enough so they're going to give you the full blown like support that someone who leads a round gives,
Yep.
but not dilute so much that the people who are originally in the seed round or whatever previous rounds lose interest and motivation. And you have to strike that balance very closely.
Love it. Well, last thing, Curtis, we've talked a lot about advice, right? Advice you got along the way, how important it is to get good advice. And now that you've been doing this for a few years and gotten a bunch of different pieces of advice, is there advice that you like giving to founders as they're getting ready to think about raising capital or startups in general? But you know what the podcast is about. So is there a favorite piece of advice that you've been giving to founders who are raising capital?
Um, there's not a favorite piece. I tell people that, especially in the early days, like in a seed round, the real advice I say, because if you're, yeah, I mean, I won't give the context, but the advice I find myself giving that people tell me they haven't heard before is when you're choosing your initial investors, if you want to build, some people want to build a Web3 Bitcoin thing that they're just going to pump and dump. And if you're doing that, then I just don't know what to tell you because I don't know that concept. I'm not interested in that. It's not at all what I'm doing. I don't have good advice for you, frankly. But if you're trying to build a big company that's going to be around for a long time, you want to make real impact, you want to change the world, you want to change businesses, then what I don't think you should get the person who's gonna if you're doing a seed round, I don't think you should get the person who's gonna give you your first customers and help you hire your first team and all this stuff. I don't think that's in your best interest, actually. I think that if you can't figure out how to do most of that at seed round when you actually are like have a lot of freedom and you don't have any customers, so you're not like under a lot of pressure. Your product can be full of bugs, but you don't have customers yet for the most part, not big paying ones. So like you can get away with it. You know the problem better than they do, and you have a lot of friends ideally who have followed you. You're a leader. You're going to lead a whole company, so ideally you have some people who want to follow you. I think it's a good time to prove to yourself that you can actually hire some people and get some customers. And the type of investor that you should find is not someone who just lands all that for you. It's not a growth round, it's a seed round. So they shouldn't help you grow. The people that you want are the people who can advise you well on how to do a good Series A and who can help you grow if you can prove that you can do a little hiring and get some customers and build a good product. And if you optimize for that, I think you'll end up in the long term in a much better position where you have someone on your board who's going to help you build a great company instead of someone on your board who's going to help you have a great seed round.
Mm.
And a lot of people are optimizing for a great seed round when they should be optimizing for building a great company. And I think it's a serious mistake a lot of people make.
That was my episode with Curtis Northcutt, founder and CEO of Cleanlab, adding trust to every input and output of AI systems. Curtis was extremely generous with the information that he shared in our conversation. If I were you, I'd go back and listen again and take notes. I hope this episode helped you gain a new perspective around venture capital and what it takes to get funded. When we come back, we'll see what questions my producer, Paige, is bringing to the table. Like many of you, my last venture-backed startup was a SaaS business. In that company early on, we had the opportunity to sell into a large enterprise, but ran into some walls when they asked us if we were SOC 2 certified. Not only were we not certified, we also found out that it would take our small team a ton of time to get that done, and so we ended up abandoning the deal. If you haven't run into a situation like that where a potential customer or investor is asking if you're SOC 2, HIPAA, GDPR, or ISO 27001 certified, you probably will soon. But unlike me, you could use a company called Vanta to help. Vanta helps automate up to 90% of the compliance work, getting you audit ready in weeks rather than months, and eliminating up to 85% of the costs. Not only that, but Vanta can start small with you and scale up as you grow, helping you land bigger deals and earn customer trust. The best part is, Vanta is offering funded listeners $1,000 off for going to vanta.com/funded. That's VANTA.com/funded for $1,000 off your service. Check it out.
Hi, Jason.
Hey P, what's up?
You're in a new location, huh?
I am. So not in my fancy studio anymore. I am in São Paulo, Brazil.
Very nice. I'm really, really excited about this episode today because I was listening to it and I continuously had thoughts come up around why I think that he had so much success around his seed and his Series A. And I kind of wanted to talk about those things and then get your feedback or your opinions on if you think I'm right or I'm wrong around my assumptions.
Okay.
So,
I love testing how much progress you've made in your understanding of venture and raising capital after all these episodes.
well, it seems like we're about to find out. So let's see.
All right, let's go.
Fingers crossed. So as I was listening to this episode, first off, Curtis is, amazing. He
Very
didn't
impressive.
start off in a place that you would think he started off at, looking at where he is now. I'm sure everyone heard, but he grew up in Kentucky, very poor family, didn't have good schooling, and somehow managed to find his way to get a PhD, work at some of the biggest companies in the world, or in the US at least, like Google, Facebook, Amazon. But all of that was impressive, right? But the things that stuck out to me the most was actually like his demeanor and certain topics that he touched on that made me realize, oh shit, this is why investors were pulled to him so heavily. So the first thing that I want to talk about is that when he was getting ready for his fundraise for his Series A, before he really did anything, he started reaching out to certain people in his network that were in, the VC realm, kind of, at least. And he literally just set up meetings to get feedback with investors who were outside of his industry, like they were never going to raise in him anyways, just to get feedback and insights around, is he hitting on the problem right? Is he making any sense? Where is he confusing people? Whatever. And he took the time to do that, which I thought was really impressive. Another thing that he did, and he mentioned multiple times throughout the episode, is that even though he's the best one or even though he runs his company, it doesn't mean he knows everything. So, and that's like a small thing for me to say, but it's important because there was a pattern throughout this episode of him continuously saying he was learning, listening to people, listening to investors around him, had a ton of respect for everyone. And there was even a segment in the podcast where he was just talking about how much respect he had for investors because he understood what their job was, and
Mhm.
how through that understanding he has built so many connections with investors and people in that world of people who really trust him. And another thing I wanted to call out before I kind of get your opinion on this is he was talking about how he was prepping before SVB crashed. And this was like 6 months before SVB crashed. And he called out in the episode that it's his job to be ahead of the curve, which I thought was badass. And that 6 months before SVB crashed, he ended up chatting with people that he trusted. Before SVB went under, he was talking to some investors, some VCs that he'd known in his network, and they were telling him, they're like, listen, I think that this market is gonna, like, something's gonna happen. Something bad is gonna happen. And then he devoted the next 6 months to building out this open, I'm going to butcher the words, but this open service of his product, while also hardening this SaaS product and getting ready for the crash to essentially happen, so that when that happened, he would be ready to raise. I don't know. I feel like I'm butchering this a little bit, but there was a bunch of things in the episode that just showed me that he was constantly thinking about the relationships that he was building and the momentum
Yep.
that he was building that made it just be like, check, 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 check. Of course, we're gonna raise a really, really great round.
Yeah, and you hit on all the checks that I would have thought of as well. So good job, passing grade, flying colors. I think what's important to note is that you could interpret what he was doing as VC fundraising gamesmanship, but it's not really. It's the markers of a founder that really knows what they're doing, has a really strong vision, happens to play into what VCs want to see and hear and stuff like that. So you could think about it in the direction of like, oh, he's playing the game perfectly, but really, he's trying to be as prepared, as smart as possible. And one of the things that I think works so well for him, both in how he deals with investors, but also the people that he recruits, people that want to work with him, is that he has a really good balance of extreme confidence in what he knows while also carrying a significant amount of humility, right? Identifying the things that he doesn't know. And he tries to ask questions and tries to understand things in order to just fit in better, move faster, do the right thing. And so I thought that was an amazing combination. And that first thing that you said about arranging meetings
Yeah.
with VCs that wouldn't necessarily look at his deal, that maybe is a luxury that not everyone has,
True.
but everyone can do a version of what he did, which is try to figure out what other people think of your company and your pitch, right? I'm fond of saying founders are too close to their business to be really good at describing their stuff as clearly as possible because they know too much. They think certain things are important when they're not. They assume people know certain things when people usually don't know them. And so like their stories are just convoluted. And he did the right thing. He looked for outside feedback to improve his pitch. So yeah, I mean, I love the way he approached it. And then, it takes a lot of confidence in what you're doing to listen to warning signals and plan for the future the way he did. So thought he was great. Would love to spend more time with him. And I'm glad you picked up on the things that he did so well.
Yeah, I hope I did an okay job describing them. But as I was going through the episode, I was just like, I could see how if I was an investor and I was having a conversation with him, that I could just like, I would just have my trust in him because I've already seen him prep and prepare in all these different ways to make sure that it's not just about like him doing a good job. He genuinely just wanted the company to succeed, whether that was with him or, you know, with something else. Like he's just always like open to that,
Yeah,
which I,
open.
yeah.
You know, one thing too, though, it's not as easy as just being open to what people say, because you can go too far in one direction. VCs have a really great perspective on the industries that they're investing in because they get to see a lot of startups, a lot of founders, a lot of companies go through, and they get a chance to use pattern recognition and describe what they think might happen or give advice on what could work. But they're not operators, and a lot of them have never operated, and they certainly haven't operated your specific business. And so one thing that I think he has done really well is open his mind to feedback and suggestions from people that have context and have experience that's worth listening to. But he also has to be a good judgment of what to follow and what not to follow. Like, it isn't as simple as saying, well, be open-minded, listen to VCs. The last sentence of that direction is not do everything exactly how they tell you to. It is listen to it, take it as a perspective, integrate it into what you understand and the framework that is based around your deep understanding of your company, and then make a smart decision from there. And I think Curtis has done that incredibly well. Obviously, he was running his company and raising through very tumultuous times, right? Which requires a lot of difficult decision making. And at least up till now, has done quite well. So very, very impressive founder, very impressive conversation.
I think that's where we ended. I think that put a beautiful bow on top.
That's the debrief. If you're looking for more insights, strategies, and support around fundraising, subscribe to our newsletter. It's at fundedpod.com/newsletter. And find me on social. I'm at Jayyeh, that's Jayyeh, on almost every platform. I respond to DMs and newsletter replies, so hit me up. This episode was produced by Paige Randall.
Hey guys.
Thanks also to John O'Lee from Adamant.
Hey everyone.
And as always, one last thanks to our sponsor, Vanta, the leading automated security and compliance platform.